Welcome everyone to the Fairy Frequency channel. Tonight I'm going to read to you from this very creepy book titled Ghosts and Ghastlies. Now this book is full of stories that were gathered together by Helen Hoke. Each one is by a different author. If you've missed any of the previous chapters, you can find them in our original playlist titled Ghosts and Ghastlies. Tonight's chapter is called The Wild Ride in the Tilt Cart. This was originally written by Sorche Nick Leodes, in which Tommy Hayes arrives in the Scottish Highlands for a fishing holiday with his friend. There is no one to meet him at the station, so he sets out to walk the lonely 5 miles at night. An old tilt cart comes by and slows down to give Tommy a lift. There was a lad named Tommy Hayes, and a more likable lad you'd never hope to see. For all that he was a Sassenach born and bred, Tommy was the sort to take his fishing very seriously. So when a Scottish friend wrote him and invited him to come up to his place in the Highlands for a visit and be sure to bring his fishing gear, Tommy was delighted. He had always heard the fishing up where his friend lived was extra fine, but he'd never had a chance to try it before. So right away he sent a telegram to his friend to say he was coming and what time they could expect him to get there. Then he packed up his fishing gear and a few clothes in his bag, and off he went. He stepped off the train just about nightfall, into the midst of a teeming rain, with the water coming down in buckets full and sloshing all over the place. The very first thing he discovered was that nobody had come to meet him. The station was on the edge of a small village, and there wasn't a soul in sight, except for a station master, and he was inside the station, keeping out of the rain. Tommy couldn't understand it, for he'd sent the telegram in plenty of time. He went in and asked the station master if he had seen anyone in the village from his friend's place, thinking maybe they'd had an errand to do and would be coming along for him later. But the station master said that nobody at all had come over from that way for as good as a week. Tommy was surprised and maybe a little bit annoyed, but he settled down in a corner of the station to wait for somebody to come and fetch him. He waited and waited, but nobody came at all, and after a while he found out why. The station master came out of his bit of an office with a telegram in his hand. "This is for the folks up where you're going," he told Tommy. "Maybe you're not mind taking it along since you're going there yourself." Tommy didn't have to read the telegram to know that it was the one that he had sent to his friend. Well, that explained why nobody had come to meet his train. And what was more, nobody was going to come. Since the telegram had been delivered, they wouldn't know at all. Since the telegram hadn't been delivered, they wouldn't know at all that he was there. "Oh, well, 'tis a pity," said the station master. "'Twas early this morning I got it, and I'd have sent it along had anyone been passing by that was going in that direction. But what with the weather and all, there's a few been out this day, and what there was bound the other way." Well, being a good-natured lad, Tommy couldn't see any sense in making a fuss about it. He'd just have to find a way for himself to get where he wanted to go. The station master was sorry for Tommy, but he could give him no help. There was nobody in the village who'd be able to take Tommy to his friend's house that night. 2 or 3 of the folks in farm carts, but the beasts were all put up for the night, and folks were all in their beds. They wouldn't be likely to take it kindly if Tommy woke them out of their sleep. "You could stay in the station overnight," the man said. "You'd be welcome to do so if you liked to. Happen there'll be someone along on the morrow going the way that you want to go." "And maybe not," said Tommy, not feeling very hopeful. "No, if I'm going to get there at all, I can see I'll have to walk." The station master agreed. "'Tis a matter of 5 miles. "That's not too bad," said Tommy, determined to be cheerful. "Mostly up and down hill," said the station master glumly. "The road is rough forby, and 'tis raining." "It can't be helped," said Tommy. "I'll just have to make the best of it." He picked up his bag and started out into the rain. The station master came to the door and pointed out the road Tommy was to take. Tommy had gone a little way when the man called out to him, "Have a care for old Robbie McLaurin. I doubt he'll be out on the road the night." That didn't mean a thing to Tommy, so he just plodded along through the rain. The station master had told him no lies about the road. Tommy couldn't remember having trod a worse one. It was up and down hill, all right. Tommy toiled along, splashing through the puddles and slipping on loose pebbles, and the rain pouring from the back of his hat brim down inside the collar of his coat. He was beginning to wonder if the fishing was going to be fine enough to pay for all the trouble he was going through to get it, when he heard the sound of cartwheels rolling up the hill behind him. He stopped and turned to look, and although it was growing dark, he could make out the vague shape of a tilt cart coming toward him. It had a canvas top stretched over some of the framework, and Tommy thought to himself that he could get a lift, he'd be out of the rain at any rate. He set his bag down and stood in the middle of the road, waving his arms and shouting. "Will you give me a lift up the road?" called Tommy. The driver did not answer, but the cart came on swiftly, bumping along over the ruts in a heedless way. As it came up to him, Tommy called out again, "Will you give me a lift?" The man in the cart didn't say "A," but he didn't say "nay." The cart kept on rolling along, and Tommy had to pick up his bag and jump to the side of the road to keep from being run down. "I'll pay you well," cried Tommy as he jumped. He felt rather desperate. The tilt cart was his only hope, for he doubted if he'd have another chance to get a lift that night. "I'll pay you well," said Tommy again. The driver did not answer, but it seemed to Tommy that the horse that was drawing the cart slowed down a little. Tommy took that as a sign that his offer had been accepted. He picked up his bag and ran after the cart and hopped in beside the driver without waiting for the cart to come to a full stop. As soon as Tommy was in the cart, the horse picked up speed again. The creature didn't seem to be minding the roughness of the road in the least. It brought the cart up to the crest of the hill at a good round pace, and when they started down the other side, the horse stretched its legs and fairly flew. The cart bounced and bumped and jolted over the ruts, and Tommy's teeth chattered with the shaking he was getting. All he could do was hold fast to the side of the cart and hope for the best. The cart wheels threw out sparks as they hit the stones that strewed the road, and every now and then a big one sent the cart a foot or more in the air. Uphill and downhill went Tommy, with the cart hanging on for dear life and expecting to land any minute in a heap in the ditch with horse, cart, and driver piled on top of him. He plucked up enough courage after a while to attempt to implore the driver to slow down. He turned to look at the man beside him. What he saw took the words out of his mouth. It wasn't so much the sight of him, although that was bad enough. He was the hairiest creature Tommy had ever seen in his life. A wild thatch of hair grew over his head and down over his ears, and was met by a long grizzled beard and that almost covered his face, and blew in the wind as if it had a life of its own. But that wasn't what struck Tommy dumb. With all that hair in the way, Tommy could not be sure of it, yet he had have sworn that the man was grinning at him. Tommy didn't like it. He felt that grin was full of peculiar sort of evil, and it gave Tommy such a queer feeling that he hurriedly turned away without saying a word. Just at that moment the road made a turn, and he saw at the side of it, a little distance ahead, a great stone gateway. Tommy knew from the station master's description that it was the entrance to his friend's place. He gave a great sigh of relief. "Pull up," he cried to the driver. "This is where I get out." But the driver made no sign of stopping, and the horse went racing past the gate. Tommy rose in his seat, shouting, "Stop!" Just then the cart wheels hit some obstruction in the road, and Tommy, taken unawares, lost his balance. Over the side of the cart he flew, and landed in the road on his hands and his knees. By the time he pulled himself together and got to his feet, the cart was out of sight, although he could still hear the horse's hoofs pounding down the other side of the hill. Tommy would have liked to have had a chance to tell that fellow exactly what he thought of him, but it was too late for that. The cart was gone, and Tommy's bag had gone with it. But at least he hadn't paid the driver. Taking what comfort he could from that, Tommy limped back to the gateway and up the drive to the door of his friend's house. Tommy's friend was terribly surprised when he opened the door at Tommy's knock and saw him standing there on the doorstone. But when he saw the plight Tommy was in, he asked no questions. He hurried Tommy up to his room and saw that he had good hot bath and found him some dry clothes to put on. When Tommy came downstairs again, warm and dry, feeling 100 times better, he was so relieved to have arrived safely that he was prepared to treat his whole experience as a joke. He handed over the telegram and told his friend he didn't think much of the telegraph service in the Highlands. Tommy's friend had several other guests staying with him, and they all gathered around Tommy now to hear the story of his mishap. "Oh, Tommy, lad," said his friend, "'tis a long road and a bad night for walking." "Did you walk all the way?" asked one of the guests. "Well, no," said Tommy, "but I wish that I had. I got a lift from one of your wild Highlanders. I never had such a ride in my life before, and I hope that I never shall again. And to top it all off, that fellow went off with my bag." "I wonder who it would be?" asked Tommy's friend. "Not many would be traveling in weather the likes of this tonight. The road is bad enough at best. A bit of rain makes it terrible." "I'll grant you that," said Tommy. "The fellow was driving a tilt cart." "A tilt cart!" exclaimed another man. "Oh, they're not in the common hereabouts. The only one I call to mind is the one belonging to old Rabbi McLaren." "Now that you mention it, I remember," said Tommy. "That was the name of the man the station master told me to have a care for. I suppose he meant that I was to keep out of his way. How I wish I had." There was a dead silence for all of 5 minutes. Then Tommy's friend asked, "What sort of man was he to look at, Tommy?" "An old man, I'd say," Tommy told him. "He had more hair on his head and face than I've ever seen on a human being before. It probably looked more than there really was of it, because it was so tangled and matted. Of course, it was too dark for me to see much of him." "What was the horse like, Tommy?" asked his friend. "Not what you'd call a big beast," Tommy answered. "In fact, he was somewhat of a small side, but how he could go! That horse would make a fortune on a racetrack. We bumped and thumped along at such a pace that I expected both wheels to fly off at any minute." "'Twas old Rabbi McLaren, to be sure," said the guest who had asked about the tilt cart. "He was always one to be driving as if the devil himself was after him. There's a bad spot a mile further on over the hill. If you miss the road on the turn, there over the cliff you go to the glen below. Old Rabbi came tearing along hell-bent one stormy night and missed the turn and went over." "Went over!" Tommy exclaimed. "It's a wonder he wasn't killed." "Killed?" repeated the other man. "Of course he was killed. Old Rabbi's been dead for a dozen years." It took Tommy a minute or two to get through his head what he was being told. Then, all of a sudden, he understood. "Dead?" screeched Tommy. "Then I've been riding with a ghost?" And he fainted dead away. The next morning, one of the gillies brought Tommy's bag up to the house to see if it belonged to anyone there. He had found it lying in the glen at the foot of the cliff below the road. It was a good stout sort of bag that is strapped as well as locked, so all the harm that had come to it was a scratch here and there. Tommy had recovered from his fright by that time, so they took him out and showed him the place where old Rabbi went over. They told Tommy he was lucky that he left the cart where he did, for when it got to that bad spot where the tragedy was always reenacted, and over the cliff again went the old man with his cart and his horse. There had been some folks who got a ride with old Rabbi, expecting to reach the village over beyond the next hill, who had found themselves below the road in the glen instead. A number of them had been hurt badly, and 2 or 3 had never lived to tell the tale. Tommy suffered no ill effects from his experience. To tell the truth, he was rather proud of it, and as he took his fishing seriously, he didn't let the ride with the old Rabbi spoil his holiday. He stayed on to the end and fished all the streams in the neighborhood, and had a wonderful time. But for a long time after he went home to London, he couldn't sleep well on stormy nights. As soon as he turned out the light and closed his eyes, he started to dream that he was riding wildly over the rough stony road in the tilt cart with the ghost of old Rabbi McLaren. And that is the end of a wild ride in the tilt cart. Thank you again, folks, for joining us tonight. And if you have missed any of the previous chapters of this creepy, creepy book, you can find them again in our original playlist titled Ghosts and Ghastlies. Thanks again, everyone. Sweet dreams.